I want to start though with two stories about myself. One is about my experience as a cyclist in London, and the other is about my career in and around transport and the environment. And the theme that's common to both of these stories is the theme of change. And the fact that change and the scale and direction of change and the nature of change, in my experience, having looked at these issues from a variety of different points of view, depends very much on which direction you're looking at it from. So what looks like a glacially slow change from one point of view can feel like rapid and breakneck, put my teeth in. Breakneck speed from another point of view. So the first story is about myself as a commuter cyclist. I started cycling to work in 1981. Put up your hands if you're prepared to admit that you were working in 1981. Well, okay, there's a few oldies in the audience. So 1981, how long ago was that? So here's some facts and figures. Adam and the Ants were number one, Stand and Deliver. I had a summer job in the Selfridges toy department in the sales. I was in charge of the Hornby Railway display. A difficult job for a recent school leaver, as you imagine. The Ford Cortina was the nation's best-selling car, and that is the model. That's how long ago 1981 was. And IBM produced their first PC, and the word internet first appeared for the first time. Now, my experience as a commuter cyclist in London is that however much further we have to go, the situation out there on the streets is completely transformed. When I first started cycling to work at Selfridges, my rally medallion with the side pull brakes, every 3-4 days, you'd see another cyclist and you'd wave, how are you? Okay. It's completely different to that. So now in the rush hour in the mornings, there are 40, 50, 60 people at the lights at most of the busy junctions. So however much further we've still got to go compared to the early days when I started doing this, it's completely different. And I think we have to build on that and recognize what has been achieved and work with colleagues from around the world in making sure we're doing the best we can in the context in which we find ourselves. So my second story is about my career. I began my career as a sort of, as Philip's referred to, as a campaigner and a lobbyist. I worked at the Council for Protection of Rural England. I then went to run what was a very small organisation called the Pedestrians Association, which we relaunched after a couple of years of Living Streets. Is Tom Platt here? So his name on the list? No, but Alistair's here. Who's been involved with that? Alice Hampton. And when you're outside a big bureaucracy like Transport for London and you're committed to a set of issues, you cannot believe how slowly stuff happens. You think, why can't you understand the brilliance of my arguments? Can't you understand the passion that I'm bringing to this argument? What is wrong with you people that you don't get this, and why can't you do it quicker? And then you go inside, as I did, inside a big organisation like TfL, and you put on a grey suit and a tie, and you realise that the pace of change inside a big, complex organisation with multiple competing priorities, lots of different political pressures in all sorts of different directions, customs and practices about how to do things, the pace of change feels very different. And I have to say that being inside a big organisation like TfL, the pace of change around cycling is breakneck. Now, it doesn't feel like that outside, but in terms of an issue gaining momentum, today's a very important part of that, I think. I agree with Ashok on that. This is really moving quite quickly in relative terms. So if you're outside, it feels unbelievably slow. What's wrong with this process? Why can't it be? If you're inside, this feels like an issue whose time has come and which is moving out at a very significant rate. So, the first thing to say, and I think several people have stressed this, and it's clear from the experience of Amsterdam and other parts of the world, that the most important thing you need to make a city change the way it regards its transport system is political leadership. And I think the creation of the office of mayor and the personalities and priorities of the first two holders of that office, Ken Livingstone and more recently Boris Johnson, has been a critical part of the context in which there's been this change going on around how we regard urban transport, what we think about in terms of priorities, what we put first, what we put second, and so on and so forth. And the fact that Boris, and this is not a party political point, I hasten to add as a humble official, is a commuter cyclist is extremely important. Ministers, senior politicians in Amsterdam cycle as a matter of course. It's still, and Norman is a good example of this in the UK, it's still relatively rare for senior decision makers to cycle as part of everyday travel. So Boris's role as a cycle commuter is a really important part of why cycling is getting the profile and attention it's now getting after many years of not having had that. And Boris has made clear he wants London to be what he's called a cyclised city, a city where cycling is a core part of how people travel every day. Now, Boris is not actually particularly interested in a kind of formal road user hierarchy where certain groups always come top in all circumstances, but he's made it very clear in many, many contexts that he wants cycling to be part of what London transport looks and feels like, and the things that need to happen to make that come about as quickly as possible. So we've got a target to increase cycling by 4-fold by the middle part of next decade. admittedly from a low base, and I'll come back to that. But this is still an ambitious target given where we're starting from. So, but don't underestimate the significance of Boris in all this and the Mayoralty. So the first sort of measurement of how seriously London is taking this, of course, is how much we're committing in terms of resources. Now, how much you spend is only a relative proxy for how well you're doing, because you could spend money incredibly inefficiently and not actually get many results. But if you look at the rate of spend since the early part of the existence of the Mayoralty, it has increased significantly, and particularly in the last 3 to 4 years. So we're now spending sums of money that were unimaginable when I first went to TfL, which were in the low single figures of millions. We're now spending, in 2010, we spent about £100 million on cycling. Now, that's about half the rate of some of the cities we're told about, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, per head of population. So we still could spend more, making sure as long as we spend it wisely. But the rate of investment in this activity is very significantly greater than it was when TfL was first founded back in the early 2000s. And I think that's an important, one of the indicators of the change that I was talking about. We're currently in the process of debating the next 10-year business plan for TfL, and we are making the case, as you can imagine, within the organisation for continued substantial investment in cycling in order to maintain the momentum we've now got going with the projects that we've been working with many of you on. So the crucial question is, what's happening? Well, the answer is that the number of people cycling in London on a variety of measures is going up very, very sharply. Now, it's starting from a low base, and I think the fact that we're starting from a low base is part of the reason why it's difficult to do this quickly, and I'll come back to that in a second. But that looks to me like a pretty steady upward trajectory, subject to seasonal variations. So cycling has more or less doubled on London's maze roads, according to the TLRN traffic counts. And over London as a whole, it's gone up by about 70%. So that's a slightly different way of measuring it. But if you look at the whole of London, it's gone up by about 70%. So it has increased very significantly, relatively speaking, from a low base. And we've got lots of good data around the number of people cycling, how often the average London cycles, how many bikes are in the city. And all those metrics are going in the right direction. So let's be clear about where we are headed and the rate of change. Now, this, I think, is a crucial slide because it shows the international and, if you like, sort of institutional context in which London's development is taking place. Two things are true about other cities in the world, particularly Northern Europe. We've heard some fantastic examples from Amsterdam earlier this morning. Two things are true about cities which are doing better relatively than London in terms of cycling. The first is they never let their cycling mode share fall anywhere like as far as London did. So the lowest point in Amsterdam for cycling was 25% of all trips, at which point the Dutch revolted. 25%? So we're starting from a significantly lower base, about a 25th, so 25 times as many trips on bikes in Amsterdam were being taken at the lowest point in the early 1970s when the Dutch decided, the Amsterdam Committee decided that's too low, there are too many people being killed, we've got to do something about this, as that video very graphically demonstrated. We started really seriously in the last 4 or 5 years in terms of investment and commitment at a 1% of trips. And my own hypothesis about this is if you start at such a low base, by definition, a very small proportion of your population will be doing this activity, and therefore, when they're not doing it, only a small portion of people in the transport fleet will think about what it's like to be a cyclist. So there must be some threshold, which unscientifically I would guess is about 10% of journeys, below which if you fall, getting back is going to be relatively more difficult than if you start at a base like 10, 15, 20, 25%. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't be doing as much as we can to catch up, but it is very important to stress that not only did these cities start from a high base, they also started, as Janine made clear, 30 or 40 years ago, coming back from a much higher base. What's incredibly important for London is that the rate of growth of cycling in London is comparable to the rates of growth that Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and other cities saw at the point when they started putting serious time and effort into this thing. So although it feels very slow and it feels very low, the relative rate of growth of cycling is about the same in London in the last 4 or 5 years as was the case in these other cities around the world.